Imagine this. A small nation, just completely overwhelmed, facing this huge enemy. Survival itself is on the line. People are terrified, hiding out. It really does sound like something out of a legend.
And, well, in a sense it is. Today we're doing a deep dive into a really powerful story from the Bible, from the book of Judges. We're talking about Gideon.
Right. And this is set in a pretty rough time for ancient Israel, isn't it? There's this cycle happening.
Exactly. A pattern of turning away from God, then facing oppression. And here it's 7 really harsh years under the Midianites, and then finally crying out for help.
And the sources paint a grim picture of that Midianite oppression. Like a plague, right? Destroying crops, taking livestock.
Utterly devastating. The text compares them to locusts, just consuming everything. People were forced into hiding in caves and mountains just to survive. It was bleak.
And that's where we meet Gideon. Not some obvious hero figure at first.
Not at all. He's described as, well, seemingly an ordinary young man. Yeah. And we find him threshing wheat, but secretly in a wine press.
Hiding it, basically. Trying to save a bit of food from the Midianites. It just screams fear and scarcity.
It really does. And that's the starting point. What's so fascinating is how this fearful guy is called to this massive task.
So our mission today is to explore that. How does this unlikely person get chosen, and what happens next? Because the story takes some very surprising turns.
Definitely. It starts with this divine encounter. The angel of the Lord appears to Gideon.
Which is a big deal in itself, often signifying God's direct presence or message.
Absolutely. And the greeting is just striking. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior.
Talk about irony.
Yeah.
Here's Gideon hiding in a hole, trying not to be seen, and he's called a mighty warrior. You can almost picture him looking around like, whoa, me.
Yeah, exactly. And his response is pure, raw honesty based on his reality. He doesn't suddenly puff out his chest. He questions it.
He pushes back, right?
He does. He says something like, "Forgive me, my Lord, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about?" Feels like abandonment.
That's such a human reaction, isn't it? Trying to square faith with suffering. We've all felt that, I think, in difficult times.
Completely relatable. It's that fundamental question. Why the hardship if God is present and powerful?
But the divine response doesn't really engage with the why in that moment. It's a command.
It cuts straight through the doubt. Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? It's direct. It's a commission.
Go with the strength you have. Not some strength you wish you had, but what you possess right now because I am sending you.
Precisely. But Gideon still hesitates. He brings up his own background.
Yeah, he says, "But Lord, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." He's pointing to his social standing, or lack thereof.
He sees himself as insignificant. But the reassurance he gets isn't about puffing him up. It's about who is with him.
I will be with you. That's the core promise, isn't it?
And you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. The power comes from God's presence, not Gideon's resume.
Okay, but even with that promise, Gideon wants, well, he wants a sign. He needs more concrete proof.
Which leads us to the famous story of the fleece. He's asking for tangible reassurance.
His first test is pretty specific. He lays out a piece of wool fleece and asks that by morning, the fleece is soaked with dew, but the ground all around it is dry.
Seems impossible, right? Dew is usually everywhere.
But the next morning, that's exactly what happens. The text says he wrung out a whole bowl full of water just from the fleece while the ground was bone dry.
A pretty undeniable sign, you'd think.
You would. But Gideon, he asks for another one, even bolder this time.
He really pushes it. Now he asks for the opposite. The fleece stays completely dry, and the ground all around it gets covered in dew.
Which, again, seems to defy how moisture works.
And again, God grants it. The fleece is dry, the ground is wet.
What do we make of these fleece tests? Is it just about Gideon's lack of faith, or is there something more? People talk about symbolism.
There are interpretations, yeah. Maybe the fleece is Israel, receiving God's blessing, even when the world around is barren. Or maybe later, Israel becoming a blessing itself. But I think the key thing here is God's patience.
His willingness to meet Gideon where he was.
Exactly. It's not held up as the ideal, constantly demanding signs. But in this moment, God showed immense grace to build Gideon's wavering confidence. You see a shift in Gideon after this.
From fearful doubter to someone ready, albeit maybe still nervously, to lead.
Yeah, he's moving forward. So Gideon musters an army. The text says it was a considerable force initially.
Okay, so maybe things are looking up. Big army, signs from God.
You'd think. But then comes another twist. God tells Gideon the army is too big.
Too big. Against an enemy described as being like sand on the seashore. That makes no sense militarily.
None whatsoever. God instructs Gideon to tell anyone who is trembling with fear that they can leave.
And what happens?
A massive number leave. 22,000 men turn back, leaving Gideon with just 10,000. Imagine seeing two-thirds of your army just walk away.
That must have been demoralizing. For everyone.
You'd assume so. But God says even 10,000 is too many.
Still too many. But now.
He tells Gideon to take the remaining men down to the water for, well, a drinking test.
A drinking test. How does that work?
It's very unusual. He's observed how they drink. Those who kneel down and put their mouths directly to the water are separated from those who scoop water up with their hands and lap it like a dog.
Okay. Strange basis for selection. What's the result?
Astonishingly, only 300 men lap the water from their hands. The other 9,700 kneel down.
So from 32,000 initially down to just 300.
Just 300. And God says, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home.
Wow. Why shrink the army so drastically? The text gives a reason, doesn't it?
It does, and it's crucial. God says, essentially, you have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands. Otherwise, Israel might boast against me, saying, my own strength has saved me.
So the victory had to be undeniably God's work. No room for human pride or thinking they did it themselves.
Exactly. It's a powerful illustration of that theme. God's strength shown in human weakness.
And the 300 who lapped. Is there significance there? Maybe they were more alert, watching while they drank?
That's a common interpretation. Vigilance, readiness. They weren't completely lowering their guard even while drinking. And the number 300 pops up elsewhere in the Bible in contexts of significant, sometimes unexpected victories too.
So now Gideon has his tiny band of 300 facing this vast Midianite camp. He must have needed one last boost of encouragement.
It seems God knew that. He tells Gideon, if he's still afraid, to sneak down to the enemy camp with his servant Purah and just listen.
Not another miracle, but intel gathering.
Kind of, yeah. He overhears a Midianite soldier telling his friend about a dream he had.
What was the dream?
A strange one. A round loaf of barley bread like peasant food came tumbling into the Midianite camp and struck a tent so hard that it collapsed.
Barley bread. Not exactly a weapon of war.
Right. But the friend's interpretation is what hits home for Gideon. The friend says, this could be nothing other than the sword of Gideon. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands.
Wow. So the enemy themselves are basically predicting their own defeat by Gideon.
Exactly. It's the final confirmation Gideon needed. He hears this, worships God right then and there, and goes back to his men totally energized.
And his message to the 300.
Get up. The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands. He's ready. The fear seems gone, replaced by faith-fueled action.
And the battle plan itself is, well, it's not conventional.
Not even close. He divides the 300 men into 3 groups. Their equipment. Each man gets a trumpet, an empty clay jar, and a torch hidden inside the jar.
Trumpets, jars, and torches. That's it. No swords mentioned up front.
That's the initial setup. The strategy relies on shock and confusion.
So what were the instructions?
Gideon told them, watch me. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp, you blow yours and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon.
Okay, so coordinated noise and light from 3 directions suddenly appearing in the middle of the night.
Precisely. Imagine being asleep in that camp. Suddenly, trumpets blast from everywhere, jars smash, torches flare up, and there's this terrifying war cry. You'd think you were surrounded by a massive army.
Psychological warfare.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it worked perfectly. The Midianites panicked. The text says the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords.
They started fighting amongst themselves.
The chaos and confusion, yes. And then they fled in terror.
An incredible victory, achieved not through force of arms, but through obedience to a very strange plan.
It really highlights God using unexpected methods. It's about obedience, faith in action, and the reality that God can achieve great things with very little in human terms.
But the story doesn't end with that route, does it? The pursuit continues.
Right, Gideon doesn't let up. He leads the chase and also sends messengers to other Israelite tribes, Naphtali, Asher, Manasseh, and crucially, Ephraim, to cut off the Midianites' escape routes.
So reinforcements are called in for the cleanup operation.
Yes, and this phase is successful too. They capture 2 Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeb, and execute them. A significant blow.
But this also leads to some internal friction within Israel.
It does. The men of Ephraim, who came later, confront Gideon quite aggressively. They felt slighted, like, why didn't you call us when you first went to fight Midian? They felt left out of the main glory.
Pride and perhaps a bit of jealousy rearing its head. How does Gideon handle that?
Very diplomatically, actually. He praises them, saying something like, what were you able to do? Wasn't it much better than everything I did? Didn't God give Oreb and Zeb into your hands? He basically minimizes his own role and highlights theirs.
Smart move. It calms them down.
It does. It appeases their anger. It shows Gideon had some political savvy as well as military courage.
But the main pursuit of the kings continues, and Gideon and his original 300 are exhausted.
Absolutely exhausted. And they run into more trouble this time from fellow Israelites. They ask the people of Sukkot for food, just bread, for his starving men.
And the response?
Scorn and refusal. The officials of Sukkot basically say, are the heads of Zeba and Zalmunna already in your possession that we should give bread to your troops? They don't believe Gideon can actually capture the kings.
Wow. Lack of faith, lack of solidarity, they hedge their bets.
Exactly. He gets a similar hostile reception in Penuel. Gideon, though exhausted, promises retribution to both towns once he's victorious.
Does he catch the kings?
Yes, eventually.
Yeah.
He presses on, catches the remaining Midianite forces completely off guard at Karkor, and captures the two kings, Zeba and Zalmunna. The enemy army is routed.
So the threat is finally over.
It seems so. And Gideon makes good on his promises on the way back. He deals harshly with the officials of Sukkot and tears down the Tower of Penuel, punishing them for their earlier refusal and lack of faith.
There's a final grim scene with the captured kings, Zeba and Zalmunna.
Yes. Gideon confirms they were the ones who killed his own brothers at Mount Tabor. Then there's this moment where he tells his eldest son, Jether, to execute them.
But the son hesitates.
He's afraid. He's just a boy. So Gideon himself steps forward and kills the two kings, fulfilling his role as leader and avenger in that context.
So Midian is defeated, the kings are dead. What happens next for Gideon and Israel?
The Israelites are hugely grateful, obviously. They come to Gideon and offer him kingship, not just for him, but for his descendants too. They want to establish a monarchy with his family.
After everything is done, you might expect him to accept. It seems logical.
It does. But Gideon's response is really significant. He tells them flat out, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you.
Wow, that's a powerful statement, pointing back to God as the true king. A moment of real clarity and humility.
It absolutely is. He recognizes where the ultimate authority lies. However, there's a but.
Oh, what happens?
Right after this profound statement, Gideon makes a request. He asks for the gold earrings taken as plunder from the Midianites. He collects a large amount of gold.
Okay. What does he do with it?
He makes an ephod out of it. An ephod is usually a priestly garment associated with seeking God's guidance. But this one, it becomes an object of worship.
Uh-oh. So instead of leading people to God, it becomes an idol.
Exactly. The text says it became a snare to Gideon and his family, and all Israel prostitutes themselves by worshiping it there. It's a tragic turn after his declaration about God's rule.
A real paradox. He points to God as king, then inadvertently creates an idol that pulls people away. It shows how easily things can go wrong, even for someone used powerfully by God.
It's a sobering reminder. Despite this, Gideon's leadership does bring a long period of stability.
How long?
40 years of peace in the land while Gideon was alive. He also has a large family, 70 sons from his wives, plus another son, Abimelech, born to his concubine in Shechem.
Abimelech. That name sounds ominous, foreshadowing future trouble.
It certainly does, yeah. But Gideon himself lives to an old age and is buried. The peace, however, it doesn't last.
What happens after he dies?
Almost immediately, the cycle begins again. The Israelites forget the Lord who saved them. They turn back to worshiping Baals, setting up Baal-Garith as their god.
And they forget Gideon, too.
Completely. The text explicitly says they did not show kindness to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in accordance with the good he had done for Israel. It's a sad, swift return to the old patterns.
Such a powerful, complex story. What are the big takeaways for us listening today?
Well, several things stand out, I think. First, God clearly uses unlikely people. People who feel weak, inadequate, fearful.
Like Gideon hiding in the winepress.
Exactly. Second, the power of faith and obedience. Even when the instructions seem illogical or impossible, like reducing the army or the battle plan, that's how the victory came.
And the contrast between God's power and human limitations is stark throughout.
Definitely. The victory was designed so that only God could get the credit.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Where in our own lives might God be calling us to act, even when we feel completely unqualified? What are the Midianite armies of difficulty we face?
And how can we learn to rely on his strengths rather than just our own perceived abilities
Hmm.
or lack thereof? It's a challenge.
Gideon's story, with all its triumphs and even its tragic flaws at the end, remains incredibly relevant. It's about transformation, about God working through ordinary people.
It truly is. It shows that potential for change, for courage found in unexpected places.
May you, listening now, find encouragement in that. Perhaps, like Gideon, you can respond to whatever God is calling you to with faith and obedience, ready to be part of something far bigger than yourself.